I was working the front desk at a hotel in Amsterdam when an American couple walked in. They looked tired from their flight. The woman leaned over the counter and said, "We need a room with air conditioning. It's so hot here." I checked the weather app on my computer. It was 15 degrees Celsius outside. That's 59 Fahrenheit. I told them it was actually quite cool today. She looked confused. But the sign outside said 15 degrees. That's like way hotter than back home. Her husband nodded along. This isn't a comedy sketch. It's real travel psychology. I document these moments because they reveal how culture rewires our logic. If you value that kind of depth, you'll want to stay tuned. This is the level I bring every week. I had to explain that Europe uses Celsius, not Fahrenheit. They both went quiet. Then the wife asked if we could change the temperature system for their stay. I said no, that's not how thermometers work. They seemed genuinely surprised that the whole continent used a different system. That same week, another American guest called the front desk at 2 in the morning. He was upset because the shops were closed. I explained that stores in the Netherlands close around 6 or 7 in the evening. He said that was ridiculous. In Texas, Walmart is open 24 hours. How do people live here? I told him people plan their shopping during the day. He asked if there was an emergency store. I suggested the night shop 2 blocks away. He wanted directions. I gave them. 10 minutes later, he called again. He couldn't find it. Turns out, he was walking in the opposite direction because he refused to use the metric distances I gave him. He kept converting meters to feet in his head and got lost. I had to stay on the phone and guide him like a GPS. My coworker told me about a guest who complained that everyone in Amsterdam spoke Dutch. She'd been shouting at people in English, getting frustrated when they didn't immediately switch languages. My coworker explained that Dutch is the national language here. The guest said, "But everyone speaks English in the movies." She genuinely thought the Netherlands was an English-speaking country. When my coworker suggested learning a few Dutch phrases, the guest refused. She said Americans shouldn't have to learn other languages because English is universal. My coworker just smiled and walked away. Most people would stop here and laugh, but I track these stories for what they say about mindset. If that kind of lens matters to you, you're already part of the small group that sees the pattern most travelers miss. Another traveler asked me why the hotel didn't have ice machines on every floor. I explained that Europeans don't typically use as much ice in drinks. He looked at me like I'd said something offensive. "How do you keep drinks cold?" I told him we use refrigerators. He shook his head. "That's not the same. I need ice in everything." He then asked if he could get a bucket of ice delivered to his room every hour. I said we could bring 1 bucket, but not every hour. He left a bad review online saying our hotel didn't understand customer service. The review mentioned the ice situation 3 times. I was working at a train station in Brussels when an American tourist approached the ticket counter. He wanted to go to Paris. I asked if he wanted first or second class. He asked what the difference was. I explained that first class has more space and quieter cars. He said he didn't need that. Then he asked how long the journey would take. I told him about 90 minutes. He looked shocked. "That's it? It takes longer to drive across Texas." I smiled and printed his ticket. He looked at it and frowned. "This says 1,300 hours. What time is that?" I explained we use 24-hour time in Europe. 1 p.m. is 1,300 hours. He asked if I could change it to normal time. I said the time doesn't change, just how it's written. He left, looking confused, holding his ticket like it was written in code. A few days later, another American asked me why the train didn't have cup holders. I told him European trains aren't designed with cup holders in every seat. He said that was a safety issue. What if my coffee spills? I suggested holding it carefully or placing it on the table. He didn't have a table seat. He'd booked the cheapest ticket. He then asked if he could upgrade just to get a cup holder. I explained that upgrades are for seating class, not specific features. He seemed disappointed. Before boarding, he bought a coffee anyway and spent the whole journey holding it with both hands, looking stressed. My colleague shared a story about an American who missed his train because He didn't understand the platform numbering system. In Europe, platforms are clearly marked with numbers. But this traveler thought Platform 7 meant the 7th train of the day. He waited at Platform 1 for hours, expecting each train to be numbered. When he finally asked for help, my colleague had to explain that platform numbers are physical locations, not train sequences. The man had missed 3 connections by then. He ended up buying a whole new ticket and looked embarrassed the entire time. I was helping another tourist who wanted to know why the electrical outlets looked different. I explained that Europe uses Type C and Type F plugs, not the American Type A. She asked if the hotel could change the outlets in her room. I said no, but we had adapters available at the desk. She asked why Europe couldn't just use the same plugs as America. I told her different regions develop different standards over time. She said that seemed inefficient. Wouldn't it be easier if everyone just switched to our system? I handed her an adapter and suggested she use it. She looked at the adapter like it was advanced technology. Later, she called the desk asking how to plug it in. I had to go to her room and show her. It took 2 minutes. Another American guest complained about the lack of free water refills at restaurants. I explained that in Europe you typically pay for bottled water. He said that was a scam. Water should be free everywhere. It's a human right. I told him tap water is available if he asks, but restaurants charge for bottled service. He refused to accept this. At dinner, he brought an empty plastic bottle from his room and asked the waiter to fill it. The waiter did, but looked confused. The guest seemed proud of himself, like he'd beaten the system. He told me about it later, expecting me to be impressed. I just nodded. I once helped a family who couldn't figure out how to flush the toilet in their room. They called the front desk in a panic. I went upstairs. The toilet had a dual flush button on top of the tank. One side for liquid waste, one for solid. They'd been pressing the wall, thinking it was motion sensor activated. I showed them the buttons. The father asked why toilets couldn't just have handles like in America. I explained that dual flush systems save water. He said it seemed overcomplicated. His daughter asked if all European toilets were weird like this. I told her many modern toilets use this system. They seemed to find it fascinating and slightly frustrating at the same time. A businessman once asked me why his phone wasn't working. I asked if he'd activated international roaming. He said no. He thought his American plan would automatically work everywhere. I explained that cellular networks are different across countries and regions. He asked why phone companies couldn't just make it universal. I suggested he buy a local SIM card or use the hotel Wi-Fi. He said that seemed like too much work. Instead, he spent his entire trip complaining about not having phone service. He'd walk up to people on the street and ask them to Google things for him. Most people helped, but looked at him strangely. I was working as a server in a restaurant in Rome when an American couple sat down. They asked for the menu in English. We had one, so I brought it over. They looked through it and seemed confused. The man asked where the chicken fingers were. I told him we didn't serve chicken fingers. This was a traditional Italian restaurant. He asked what kids eat here then. I suggested the pasta or pizza. He said his kids only eat chicken fingers. I offered to check if the kitchen could prepare something simple. The chef agreed to make plain grilled chicken. When it arrived, the man looked disappointed. This isn't what I meant. He'd wanted breaded fried strips. I apologized and explained that wasn't available. They ended up eating the pasta but left a small tip, which in Italy is normal, but they seemed to do it as a complaint. Another time, an American woman asked me why Italians eat dinner so late. I explained that lunch is the main meal here, and dinner typically starts around 8 or 9 p.m. She said that was unhealthy. Your metabolism slows down at night. Don't you know that? I told her this is simply the culture here. She insisted we were doing it wrong. She asked if the restaurant could open earlier, just for her. I said we open at 7 p.m., which is already early by Roman standards. She came at 7 every night and was always the only customer for the first hour. She'd comment on how empty it was, not realizing she was eating before the normal dinner rush. I had a table of Americans who got upset because bread wasn't free. In Italy, bread comes with a small cover charge called coperto. I explained this when they asked. One of them said, "In America, bread is always free at restaurants. Why are you charging us?" I told them it's standard practice here. They said it felt like a scam. They refused to eat the bread out of principle. Then they got hungry and asked for more bread. I brought it. They ate it. When the bill came, they were surprised to see the charge again. I'd already explained it, but they'd forgotten. They debated whether to pay it. Eventually they did, but left looking annoyed. An American tourist asked me why there was no ice in her water. I explained that Europeans typically serve water at room temperature or cool, but not with ice. She said that was unacceptable. How am I supposed to drink this? I offered to bring her water with ice. She said it better be a lot of ice. I brought a glass filled with ice cubes. She took a sip and complained that now there wasn't enough water. I offered to bring another glass. She said forget it and drank it anyway, looking frustrated the whole time. I was working brunch service when an American asked for ranch dressing. We didn't have ranch dressing. He asked how that was possible. Every restaurant has ranch. I explained that ranch isn't common in Italy. He asked what people put on salad. I listed our dressings: olive oil, balsamic vinegar, lemon. He made a face. "That's not real dressing." He asked if we could make ranch. I said no. He ended up eating his salad plain and complained about it to everyone at his table. They all agreed that Italy needed to step up their dressing game. Another guest sent back her pasta because it was undercooked. I checked with the chef. The pasta was al dente, which is the traditional Italian texture. I explained this to the guest. She said she didn't care about tradition, she wanted it soft. I asked the chef to cook it longer. He was offended but agreed. When I brought it back, she was satisfied. She told her friends, "You have to be firm with them or they won't cook it right." I pretended not to hear. An American man asked me why tipping wasn't expected in Italy. I explained that servers earn a full wage here, and service is included in the bill. He said that seemed wrong. Tips motivate people to give good service. I told him the system works differently here. He insisted on leaving a 20% tip anyway. I thanked him. He said, "See? Now you'll remember me next time." I didn't have the heart to tell him that wasn't how it worked. He seemed so proud of himself. A family asked me why the pizza slices were so big. I explained that in Italy, pizza is usually served as a whole pie, not by the slice. They said that was impractical. What if we don't want a whole pizza? I suggested they share or order a smaller size. They ordered individual pizzas for everyone, including their 6-year-old. When the food arrived, they were shocked by the portions. They couldn't finish everything. They asked for to-go boxes. I brought them. They seemed amazed that we had boxes, like they'd expected us to refuse. One of them said, "At least you got that right." I was working at a tourist information center in Paris when an American asked me how to get to the Eiffel Tower. I gave him directions. He asked how far it was. I said about 2 kilometers. He stared at me. "How much is that in miles?" I told him roughly 1.2 miles. He asked why we couldn't just use miles. I explained that France, like most of the world, uses the metric system. He said that seemed backwards. America has it right. Metric is too confusing. I handed him a map and wished him luck. Another tourist asked me if people in Paris speak Parisian. I was confused for a moment. Then I realized she meant French. I told her yes. French is the language spoken in Paris. She asked if Parisian was a dialect. I explained that Parisian French has an accent, but it's still French. She seemed disappointed. She'd thought it was a separate language. She asked if that meant her French phrasebook would work here. I said yes. She looked relieved. A man approached my desk and asked how long it would take to drive to London. I told him you can't drive directly from Paris to London. There's a body of water called the English Channel in between. He asked about a bridge. I explained there's a tunnel for trains, but not a bridge for cars. He seemed skeptical. That seems like poor planning. Why hasn't anyone built a bridge? I told him the channel is quite wide and deep. He said America would have figured it out by now. I once helped an American who thought Paris was a country. I asked where she was traveling next. She said, "I'm leaving Paris and going to France." I gently corrected her. "Paris is the capital city of France." She looked embarrassed. Then she asked if that meant her whole trip was in one country. I said yes, if she'd only been to Paris. She seemed let down. She'd thought she was traveling across multiple countries. I showed her a map. She studied it quietly and said, "Geography wasn't my strong subject." Another visitor asked me why Europeans make such a big deal about World War II. I was taken aback. I explained that the war had a massive impact on Europe. Entire cities were destroyed. Millions of people died. He said, "Yeah, but that was like 100 years ago. Why not move on?" I told him it was only 80 years ago. Many people alive today remember it, or had parents who lived through it. He seemed surprised. "Wow, I thought it was way longer ago." He then asked if the war affected Paris. I told him Paris was occupied by Germany for 4 years. He didn't know that. He apologized for being insensitive and asked for book recommendations to learn more. A tourist asked me why France doesn't just adopt English as the official language. I asked why she thought that. She said it would make things easier for travelers. I explained that French is the national language and a core part of the culture. She said she understood, but still thought English would be more practical. More people speak English anyway. I told her that wasn't true. Mandarin and Spanish have more native speakers than English. She didn't believe me. She looked it up on her phone. When she saw I was right, she said, "Huh, I always thought English was number one." An American asked me if Europe was a country. I said no. Europe is a continent made up of many countries. He asked how many. I told him around 50, depending on how you define the borders. He seemed shocked. I thought it was like 5 or 6. I showed him a map of Europe with all the countries labeled. He studied it for a long time. Then he asked, "Wait, so Germany and France are different places?" I confirmed. He looked embarrassed. I really need to study more. A woman asked me why European history was so complicated. I asked what she meant. She said, "Every country has like 1,000 years of history. In America, we just have a few hundred." I explained that human civilizations have existed in Europe for thousands of years. She said that must make things confusing. I asked how. She said, "Like, how do you remember all the wars and kings and stuff?" I told her that people grow up learning it in school, just like Americans learn their own history. She nodded. Then she asked if Europeans had to memorize every battle. I said no, just the important ones. Another tourist asked me why the metric system was so hard. I asked what she found difficult. She said, "The numbers don't make sense. Like, how is a kilometer smaller than a mile?" I explained that a kilometer is actually shorter than a mile, which is why it takes more kilometers to cover the same distance. She thought about this. Then she said, "But why not just make them the same?" I told her the systems were developed independently in different regions. She said, "Someone should fix that." I agreed it would be convenient, but unlikely to happen. A man asked me if French people celebrate Thanksgiving. I said no, Thanksgiving is an American holiday. He asked what French people do in November then. I told him they live normally. November isn't a special month here. He seemed confused, but everyone celebrates Thanksgiving. I explained that only Americans and Canadians celebrate it, and on different dates. He looked surprised. He'd assumed it was a global holiday. I told him many countries have harvest festivals, but not Thanksgiving specifically. He said he'd learned something new. I was working my last shift at that hotel in Amsterdam when a guest asked me if Dutch people celebrate the 4th of July. I said no. That's American Independence Day. He asked what Dutch people do on the 4th of July then. I told him nothing special. It's just a regular day here. He seemed genuinely confused. But it's such a big holiday. I explained that it's only significant in America. He thought about this for a while. Then he said, "I guess that makes sense. I never really thought about it." That conversation stuck with me. A lot of these stories aren't about people being rude or difficult. Most of these travelers were kind. They tipped well, even when they didn't have to. They said thank you. They smiled. But they'd grown up in a specific culture with specific norms, and suddenly those norms didn't apply anymore. Everything worked differently. The measurements, the language, the electrical outlets, even the toilets. It's disorienting. I think what surprised locals most wasn't the confusion itself. It was the assumption that the American way was the default, that restaurants should have ranch dressing, that stores should be open all night, that everyone should speak English fluently, that the whole world should use Fahrenheit and miles and 12-hour clocks. These weren't demands exactly, more like expectations that hadn't been examined. One guest told me something interesting before checking out. He said, "I thought traveling would be like America, but with different buildings." That stuck with me too. He'd expected surface-level differences, different architecture, different food, but the same underlying logic, the same systems, the same assumptions about how life works. When he discovered that wasn't true, it shook him a little. In a good way, I think. He started asking more questions, curious questions, not frustrated ones. I remember another traveler who spent her whole trip complaining about everything being different. Then, on her last day, she came to the desk and said, "I get it now. It's not that you're doing things wrong. It's just different." She seemed almost sad to leave. She'd finally adjusted, and now she had to go home. The stories never really stop. Every week brought new moments of confusion, surprise, and eventual understanding. Some travelers adapted quickly. Others fought against it. A few never quite figured it out. But most people, given enough time and patience, started to see the logic in how other places worked. They realized that different doesn't mean wrong, just different. And honestly, that's the whole point of travel, isn't it? To step outside your own normal and see how other people live. To realize your way isn't the only way. To come home a little bit changed, a little bit wider in your thinking, even if it takes a few mishaps with the metric system to get there. If this perspective hit differently, it's because most channels tell travel stories. I decode cultural blind spots. Subscribe, not to follow me, but to keep sharpening how you see the world. That's the real souvenir.